Hi folks, if it's your first time here, welcome, and if you're a returning viewer, welcome back. I'm Mare, and I've been working on a Victorian crazy quilt pattern from the July 1884 edition of Godey's Ladies book. I'm also kind of doing a lazy Vlogmas / Craftmas while I'm working on this project. Essentially, you're getting a behind-the-scenes look at everything as it comes together before I make the final overarching video. It's been a couple of days, so I'll put up my decorations on my little advent calendar tree. We're getting things cleaned up and ready so we can start decorating for Yule. Because our little cream cat is still on crate rest, we're considering making the crate a part of the decor, possibly thread some lights on the upper section above the door closures. Definitely no decorations she can access from inside or snag with her claws or anything like that. I finished basting in the pieces of fabric and removing the pins, so now I can get on to embellishing. I didn't film the process because it really wasn't all that interesting. Little back stitches spread well apart from each other in thread or floss that matches as close as possible to the color of the fabric. The back side of this thing is actually pretty cool from an artistic point of view. It has its own aesthetic. The pattern has all the stitches marked for the seams as well as motifs to embroider. In one of my previous videos, I mentioned that working without a pattern might be simultaneously easier and more difficult. And this is what I mean. I have all of my steps planned out for me. There's very little actual thinking I need to do. I just need to make sure everything looks the way Godey's intended, while working with the fabrics that I chose. If I'd been working without a pattern to begin with, I could have eliminated some of the fussier elements, but I'd still have to make some pretty solid artistic choices on my own. Fun. I will say that with the somewhat Zentangle-ish way the pattern was designed, it made for some interesting construction to get the curves and angles specified. I wound up doing quite a bit of English paper piecing to get the edges turned under just right. Even so, this isn't an absolute exact replica of the pattern. It's just the closest I could get to it. Is it possible the solution would have been to sew the pieces right side together, clip curves or angles and flip? Possibly, but this is the method I used. I noticed that there are quite a few areas with a wee gap between the pieces that I possibly could have eliminated by doing some ladder stitch, which I incorporated towards the end. Even so, I'm pretty sure those areas will come together nicely or be entirely covered by the seam stitching. I'm just glad to not be dealing with a ton of pins anymore. But speaking of the seam stitches or fancy work, I kind of wish the issue had come with a stitch dictionary. Because as clear as the pattern is, there's only so much information you can get out of blue dotted lines. There's a lot of blanket stitch. From some of the modern patchwork embellishment books I browsed, you'd think feather stitch was where it's at, but I can only pick out one instance of feather stitch, I think. Possibly a variation. The directions of the dots and the dashes used is also a little confusing. There are some areas I'm not sure if maybe they're indicating a stem stitch or back stitching with either a stitch or a knot on each side. Some of these just look like lines of running stitch mashed together. I mean, what the heck is that? And then there's this. Just tiny little bits and places where the stitching is not all that clear. So I guess it's up to my creative interpretation, but I was kind of looking to recreate the pattern. I guess Godey's never counted on a YouTuber trying to follow their arcane glyphs 140 years later. Needless to say, some of the resources I've been using are both contemporary to the pattern's era as well as more modern publications. Links to these will be included in the video description. So contemporary to the pattern, I've got Ladies Fancy Work, a manual of designs and instructions in all kinds of needlework, edited by Jenny June, 1886. We'll just call this one Ladies Fancy Work. Jenny June is a pseudonym for a writer by the name of Jane Cunningham Crowley. If I'm not mistaken, most, if not all, of the embroidered motifs can be found in this book, which is good because the outline on the pattern is a bit faint. Instructions for Patchwork, copyright 1884 by J.F. Ingalls, publisher. This booklet contains basic patchworking information, a few handy stitches, and a handful of templates for English paper piecing. It's a very handy book, and I think it was used by Ash LG, Christine Vike, and Shannon Makes in their Victorian patchwork videos. A book of fancy designs for ornamenting Oriental work, copyright 1884 by Mrs. M. Hainlin. An unfortunate title, but then the whole term of crazy quilting or crazy patchwork isn't much better. This booklet has a lot of good stitch information for embellishing your patchwork. It gives you basic stitches and then more advanced stitches building off the rudiments. Diagrams of quilt, sofa, and pincushion patterns circa 1898 by Ladies Art Company H.M. Brockstedt, manager. This catalog has a whole bunch of quilt block patterns at 1/12 scale that at the time could be mail ordered on thick cardboard. That said, they make a fantastic pictorial reference if you want a starting point for your own patchwork. There's a handful of stitch patterns in line art on the back cover, and as a bit of an aside, I'd say that indicates the crazy quilt fad was winding down around this point, and embellishing stitches were being thrown in as a value add. But the main attraction was the block designs, transitioning to a style more in line with today's mainstream quilting. But that's just me thinking out loud, not anything with any real basis in fact. More modern books. A to Z of Embroidery Stitches 1 and 2 by Search Press Limited. A really good reference for stitch work showing detailed steps to make the stitches listed. The Magic of Crazy Quilting by J. Marcia Mitchler. An in-depth look at Victorian patchwork breaking down patch construction and stitch techniques. Definitely one I'd recommend picking up if you can find it. Crazy Quilting for Beginners. Handy Pocket Guide by Sharon Bogan. It does what it says on the tin. It's a crash course in embellished patchwork designed to get you up and running quickly. And Creative Stitches for Contemporary Embroidery, also by Sharon Bogan. More information on embellishing. Bogan puts a lot of work into her designs, and while I find they look rather cluttered, she really does know her stuff. Her website, Pintangle, looks like I'm not the only one seeing the Zentangle parallels, is also really useful. It has a stitch dictionary that looks really handy if you know the name of a particular stitch but don't know what it looks like. Do you remember scrapbooking? I remember it being so popular it was the butt of a whole schwack of jokes, none of which I can remember. Scrapbooking was a huge thing about 10 years back? 20? How is it 20 years? Like, the 90s were like 5 years ago. At any rate, there are elements of the scrapbooking fad in a lot of Bogan's work, and it's something I've noticed in quite a few modern crazy quilting references. Lots of beads, buttons, things bolted onto the fabric, like a full lace doily just sandwiched into place so half of it's showing, you know. It just goes past maximalist to overly excessive at times, and I guess it stands as a good representation of what you could do if you had the time and energy to cover every single centimeter of the fabric you so carefully sewed into place. It just doesn't rock my socks. The books are a good reference though, so whatever floats Ms. Bogan's boat. It's just a real contrast to some of the more stripped down examples some of my fellow YouTubers have been exhibiting. Most of the modern books I'm referring to came in a Humble bundle a while back, so that's something I would recommend if you're looking for resources. Keep an eye on things like the Humble book bundles because you never know when you'll walk away with the entire set of 5th edition Shadowrun tabletop RPG game books, a run of Hellboy comics, or a collection of embroidery technique books. And yeah, those are all things that we've picked up at various times over the years. The nice thing about more frequent vlog updates is you can respond to viewer comments and observations a little quicker, so if you're a subscriber, maybe check and see if you're still subscribed because someone noticed they weren't, and also, you know, maybe boop the like button if you're down there already. Convenient call to action is convenient. A couple of folks have been a bit disappointed I didn't do a full roast of The Career of a Crazy Quilt short story that I read in full a couple of updates ago. And I'm thinking of weaving some of my thoughts on that into the big video on the entire experience, but we'll see. I have a couple of ideas on how to approach this. There were folks asking for the pattern I'm using as well as the name of the book I found pirated on the internet. In the case of the first request, I believe I had links in the video for the original blog post with the pattern found by my patron. If not, I'll have that linked in the description. I'm also going to put a couple of PDF files on my Patreon for folks to download. One will have The Career of the Crazy Quilt short story from Godey's that kicked off this little rabbit hole, as well as the pattern found on the Quilt Papers website. I printed the pattern by opening the page in Adobe Acrobat and choosing to print that page as a poster. It automatically prints it on one side each of 6 pages. And if I'm not mistaken, it has little hash marks so you can line things up and tape them together just like a printed sewing pattern. So very easy peasy. There will also be another PDF with other stories from the era featuring crazy patchwork that I came across while researching this project. I've added a few other bits and bobs from the original magazines because I think the features are interesting, like sheet music and home plans. You want a second Empire house? Not to worry, Godey's has you covered. I mean, seriously, if you play The Sims, it's a gold mine. Also, this is one of the ways that pop music, or I guess parlor music of the era, was distributed. You couldn't just go down to Sam the Record Man and get a tape or CD. Most of the time, you or someone else in your household would have to play the music yourselves. My grandfather explained this to me when I was a teenager taking piano lessons. He was chuffed that I'd be able to do that, as having someone in the family who could play always made for good entertainment. He probably should have thought about that before he sold Grandma's piano. At least that's the story my mother told me. The dodgy Hammond organ he replaced it with just didn't seem to do it for her. I mean, he probably got it second or third hand because he was cheap like that, and she was apparently a concert caliber pianist. The organ did, however, give my brother and I many discordant hours of fun as children. Still, it seems like an unfair trade-off. I've clipped a couple of songs because once my stuff is all unpacked and I've taken some time to dust off my own very rusty, nowhere near concert-level piano skills, I wouldn't mind learning a few popular period pieces, at least according to magazines like Godey's or Delineator or Peterson's, etc. Again, I'll have these up on Patreon, and it won't cost you anything except maybe a little time and a few pixels. I'm going to have them free for all patrons, so if you have a Patreon account and you follow me at the free level, you'll be able to download them. It's just a good place to store downloadables, you know? If the files aren't there by the time this video goes up, they should be there within the week. Will I complain if you decide to subscribe to one of my Patreon tiers or become a channel supporter? Well, no, but this is a little Yule gift for you, so to speak. The second request for the title of the book I found pirated that I was deliberately not naming because I'd prefer the author be paid. Putting aside the fact that somebody might want to know the title of the book for good reasons, like wanting to support the author, I'm not taking any chances with your Google foo because, as has been demonstrated, I have patrons whose ability to Google far outstrips my own. I wasn't mentioning it to challenge folks to find it for themselves, just to note that I needed help and there are resources out there. I wasn't particularly looking for a pirated copy of the book, just a place to purchase it in digital format. Hopefully for a reasonable price because the publishing industry is bonkers. I finally figured out how to make an Amazon storefront. It's linked in the description. You'll find a few books in there, a couple of which are on a very steep discount at the time of recording. I've been finding using my iPad is an okay substitute for a hardcover book. Yes, if you purchase from the storefront, you'll be using an affiliate link which contributes to the financial well-being of the channel with no extra cost to you. But aside from that, it's a way of getting a handy curated list of useful resources without resorting to internet piracy. It's also where I'll be putting things like fiction books I've enjoyed or crafting tools I've found useful. Yes, it's also lining the pockets of the corporate overlords, but as much as I would like a potential Amazon payout, which hasn't happened yet, I also believe in supporting local businesses and libraries. There's nothing stopping you from noting the books on my lists and firing up Libby. Anyhow, I'm going to get back to work on this thing and we'll see what the next video holds. If I somehow manage to finish the patchwork sampler, maybe we'll do a little recap of the stuff I made this year, or finish a work in progress or two. I also need to decorate. Lots to do.